They were instructed to do things which you would now consider to be immoral, yes?
Absolutely.
So God has commanded them to do something which you now consider to be immoral.
Let's put it this way. Even in the ancient world, divine revelation comes into a primitive, barbaric world.
Listen to what you're saying, Dinesh. Listen to what you just said. The God that you believe in is acting like a tribal war god.
The God of the... Yes, the God that is depicted in the Old Testament is... He goes, I'm picking the Jews. Yes. I'm choosing you.
Well, damn, that is a full religious faceplant if I've ever seen one. A prominent Christian caught openly admitting that his supposed infallible God commands immoral acts, then tries to excuse it by claiming that the omnipotent creator of the universe was somehow constrained by Bronze Age barbarism. And then, finally, he draws the damning conclusion. His benevolent deity behaves like a partisan tribal war god, picking ethnic favorites.
He acts like a tribal god, right? He acts like the God of only the Israelites.
It's watching someone demolish their own religion brick by brick, drawing the exact same conclusions as his interlocutor while insisting that he's delivering an impactful rebuttal. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
I get sick to death of people hand-waving away this genocide by some vague reference to the fact that Jesus came along to do something which somehow kind of undoes the immorality of it.
Why hello, my fellow apes. I hope you are well. You're about to witness an entirely cruel yet necessary demolition from a Pangburn Philosophy debate in the Bronx, where Dinesh D'Souza, best-selling Christian apologist, right-wing political commentator, and conspiracy theorist, is forced to admit that his God commanded the slaughter of babies, and that there's no moral defense for it. The issue at hand is, from the good book of course, the Amalekite genocide from 1 Samuel 15, where God explicitly instructs King Saul to commit total annihilation by putting to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camel and donkeys. Because clearly, those camels were plotting something. This is the nuclear bomb at the heart of divine command theory. If God can command genocide, then either God isn't perfectly good, or genocide can sometimes be justified. There is no third option. It's why philosopher and YouTuber Alex O'Connor comes armed with one simple strategy: cut through the layers of mystical evasion and theological escape hatches and force Dinesh to answer the question laid bare. How do you worship a God who commanded the slaughter of infants? So strap in, because we're about to witness something remarkable. The moment when God is perfectly good meets God commanded genocide. And only one of those claims can make it out alive.
Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. And if you think that this is hyperbole, consider what happens when Saul does conduct the destruction of the Amalekites as ordered, and decides to leave alive the king as well as some of the best of the livestock. He leaves them alive. For this small act of mercy, God responds by saying to the prophet Samuel, I regret that I have made Saul king because he's turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. So not even the animals can escape this genocide.
Alright, so this is how the exchange starts. It comes at the end of their debate, and we'll begin by noting how Alex frames it. By describing Saul's disobedience as a small act of mercy, he sets the terms of the debate such to force Dinesh into an impossible position. Mercy becomes the focal point, and now Dinesh is trapped. He must either defend the wholesale killing of infants or concede that his God issues a command that is, by any reasonable moral standard, indefensible.
For this small act of mercy, God responds by saying to the prophet Samuel, I regret that I have made Saul king because he's turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions.
It's a carefully constructed maneuver that casts mercy at the hinge of the story, and thus ensures that any defense will appear morally compromised right from the start. And it's genuinely brilliant, because Alex knows that the Amalekite genocide is so theologically precarious that it cannot be engaged with without blowing up Dinesh's entire position. This then is designed to expose a fault line so deep that any attempt to defend it collapses under its own moral weight, forcing Dinesh in this case to pick his poison on camera in front of an audience with nowhere to hide.
Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys.
The progression from adults to infants to even animals creates an effect of ever-expanding horror that simply can't be erased by his interlocutor's moral gymnastics.
Let's talk about the moral sense, since you raised it, and we'll just talk about it briefly.
I want to make sure we've got time for Q&A, but look, I can reread the text if you like. The Amalekites...
Well, let's not talk about the Amalekites, in part because here's the problem. For most Christians, the Old Testament is different than the new and is seen through the light of the new.
Dinesh's response here reveals the severity of the bind that he's in. By literally saying, "we won't talk about the Amalekites," he makes a preemptive concession that the Amalekite genocide cannot be engaged with. It functions in effect as a conversational surrender. The exchange is not yet fully underway, and yet Dinesh has already excluded from discussion the very text that Alex has foregrounded as central.
Well, let's not talk about the Amalekites.
So on his part, this is a strategically disastrous admission of defeat on the chosen terrain. By refusing to address the example directly, and putting it so directly even, Dinesh confirms the force of the objection, communicating to the audience that his only recourse is avoidance.
For most Christians, the Old Testament is different than the New and is seen through the light of the New.
His retreat to what most Christians believe is even more telling. He's attempting to hide behind majority opinion rather than defending the moral question at hand. It's a clumsy deployment of the appeal to popular opinion fallacy, when someone argues that something is true or acceptable because many people believe it. The logic is no different from claiming that billions of people use Facebook every day, so it can't possibly be harmful. As if sheer popularity magically erases the evidence of addiction and mental health damage. Dinesh employs this technique by hiding behind what most Christians today supposedly think, rather than grappling with the juxtaposition between genocide and God's omnibenevolence. And for him, in particular, this represents hypocrisy of the highest order. He's an apologist who suddenly cares about majority Christian opinion when obfuscating genocide, but not when cherry-picking biblical verses that justify his fundamentalist political positions. Yes, Dinesh, most Christians have a problem with this verse. They try to compartmentalize it, to come up with excuses. Of course they do. It's immoral.
The Old Testament is different than the New and is seen through the light of the New.
Adding to this, Dinesh's vague mystical language of seeing things through the light of the new explains absolutely nothing about how divinely ordained genocide can attain permissibility. It's a shallow and contrived attempt to avoid direct theological confrontation.
And is seen through the light of the New. So
But
I'm
God
not,
is
if
the
you want
same.
to,
Alex effectively deploys Christianity's own doctrine of divine immutability in order to force some engagement with a fundamental contradiction that Christians desperately want to avoid. If God is unchanging, a core doctrine of the religion, then his moral character cannot evolve between testaments.
So
But
I'm
God-
not.
the
You,
God
if
is
you
the
want to,
same.
if you want to go to, Dennis Prager, who has written about this from a Jewish perspective, has written about the Deuteronomy, the Book of Kings, the Amalekites.
Now that is a desperate fumble, right? Dinesh is juggling an indefensible theological hot potato, desperately trying to throw it onto someone who conveniently isn't there to catch it. Logically speaking, this is an appeal to irrelevant authority fallacy, when someone appeals to an authority lacking expertise, treating their opinion as decisive evidence. Consider if a flat earther said that, well, this YouTube science channel that I watch, it says that gravity doesn't work like that, when the channel host isn't there to defend their claims, and, in this case, the flat earther refuses to provide the supposed reason. Dinesh demonstrates this perfectly by invoking conservative talk show host Dennis Prager as a human shield.
If you want to go to, Dennis Prager.
And it raises the question, if Prager's arguments are so compelling, then why isn't Dinesh articulating them himself?
Written about the Deuteronomy, the Book of Kings, the Amalekites.
Sure, we can bring him out
what he
later.
considers.
And Alex's sardonic dismissal is as snappy as it is perfectly timed, highlighting the absurdity of invoking absent defenders while maintaining complete conversational control. The implication is clear. If you can't defend your own theology, Dinesh, then summoning the effigy of Dennis Prager won't save you, especially when you're just name-dropping rather than presenting his arguments.
Sure, we can bring him out
what he
later.
considers.
Speaking of narratives, an absolutely incredible, as in not credible story recently grabbed my attention. Child with stage 4 cancer deported by ICE, despite being a US citizen. I came across this thanks to Ground News' Blind Spot feature, a brilliant tool on their homepage that reveals stories being dramatically underreported by either the left or the right. This allows me to investigate my blind spot so I can see the complete picture of what's happening in the real world. The coverage breakdown is stunning. 46 news outlets total, but only one from the right. I mean, bro. An American citizen, a child with cancer, gets deported, and virtually the entire right-wing media ecosystem remains silent. So much for Save the Children, huh? You can follow along at ground.news/rationality. The way different outlets frame this tragedy is equally revealing. NBC Chicago, a centrist source with very high factuality, presents it straightforwardly, emphasizing the child's US citizenship and stage 4 cancer diagnosis at the heart of the disturbing story. But the Christian Post, that lone right-wing outlet covering it, takes, well, an incredible angle. Their headline reads, ICE unlawfully deported child with stage 4 kidney cancer, with unlawful placed in skeptical quotation marks, subtly questioning whether any actual wrongdoing occurred. Same tragic event, completely different narrative. This is precisely why ground news has become so indispensable. Their blind spot feature ensures that I'm not just seeing what my usual sources want me to see, I'm discovering the stories entire segments of the media choose to ignore. In today's polarized media landscape, these tools are essential for understanding the complete picture. Get 40% off their Vantage plan at ground.news/rationality or scan this QR code. Your subscription not only gives you balanced coverage, but also supports this channel. For anyone serious about escaping their echo chamber, Ground News delivers the full story, including the parts others don't want you to see. Thanks.
Sure, we can bring him out
what he considers
later,
to be the justifiable massacre of the Canaanites. I don't really want to go there because...
Well, I know why you don't want to go there.
Notice how the power dynamics shift further in Alex's favour in this moment, when for the first time so far, he explicitly names Dinesh's avoidance. He's taking meta-conversational control by pointing out the cowardice on the spot.
Well, I know why you don't want to go there.
Well, the reason I don't want to go there...
A sharp fork right there. When Alex finishes Dinesh's sentence for him, he isn't just interrupting, he's exposing exactly what Dinesh has been trying not to say. In this moment, Alex shows that he's running the conversation while Dinesh has no good options left. He can admit that the command is indefensible, or he can try to defend it after already saying that he won't. Either way, though, he's cornered.
Well, the reason I don't want to go there, the Old Testament is full of horrific massacres.
Yes, and
that is hold on.
Massacres which are ordained.
Massacres.
Dinesh tentatively acknowledges that the Old Testament is full of horrific massacres, but he frames them through phrasing that allows him to treat them as regrettable historical accidents, unforgivable events, not theological indictments. It's a classic apologetic move. Reformulate divine commands as mere descriptions of what happened rather than prescriptions from God, as if they were just historical records rather than theological mandates.
The Old Testament is full of horrific massacres.
But Alex refuses to let that framing stand. He's seen it 100 times already. He immediately interrupts to reinsert the essential qualifier. These are not just massacres, but massacres ordained by God.
Massacres which are ordained.
So, in this one short sentence, he's restored the full weight of his claim that violence isn't merely incidental to the history of the Israelites, but to the contrary, it is central to the narrative.
Massacres which are ordained.
Massacres which appear to be ordained by Yahweh directly.
This is subtle, but it's a dead giveaway. Dinesh's choice of words, appear to be, injects ambiguity where none exist in the Old Testament's commands to the Israelites.
Massacres which appear to be ordained.
There is not any ambiguity. The directives to kill every man, woman, and child are written in plain, unambiguous terms, and no biblical scholar, critical or confessional, disputes their clarity. Now sure, apologists like Dinesh like to pretend otherwise, but they're wrong. They're just wrong. Dinesh's hedge is nothing more than a rhetorical cushion, not genuine interpretive doubt. Second, notice the terminological pivot from God to Yahweh.
Massacres which appear to be ordained by Yahweh directly.
At first glance, it might seem stylistic, but it's actually strategic. It's even a pretty smart move on Dinesh's part. And it works on Christian audiences, it would work in church, but it doesn't work when you're talking to Alex O'Connor. You see, substituting the more technical or unfamiliar name deliberately introduces psychological distance, with Yahweh sounding like an exotic ancient figure, a distant tribal deity who would surely behave quite unlike the warm, personal God that Dinesh believes in. The shift subtly reassures the audience. It wasn't our God, the God of Christianity, who commanded this, but it was the other God, the Old Testament one, from a different time. Ironically, the God that Dennis Prager believes in. Taken together, these moves, hedging with certainty of the command and renaming the divine actor, form a two-step rhetorical maneuver. First, muddy the epistemic waters to make the command seem open to interpretation. Second, reframe the subject to make the God in question seem less familiar.
Massacres which appear to be ordained by Yahweh directly.
Sure.
Agreed. and
Well,
which
why are you
which
saying
are,
Yahweh instead of God? Why are you
because
trying to distance yourself from the God of the Old Testament?
But Alex catches and exposes this distancing strategy on the spot, not missing a beat.
Well, I'm not trying to distance myself. I'm simply trying to say that any reader.
So why is that the first time you've used the word Yahweh in this conversation?
Here, you're witnessing the classic response when a defense strategy gets exposed. Immediate denial while actively continuing the exact behavior that's being called out. Dinesh insists that he's not trying to distance himself, while clearly in the act of distancing himself. It's like watching someone claim that they're not backing away while they're moonwalking towards the exit. This is why it's really important that Alex isn't just sensing the linguistic shift, but can cite the specific first instance of its change, making the distancing strategy completely undeniable.
I'll tell you why. Because there is a movement within the Bible itself that you are completely missing.
Just on time, there's the deflection through accusation. Instead of answering why he suddenly switched to an invocation of Yahweh, Dinesh shifts to offense by claiming that it's actually Alex who lacks understanding.
You are completely missing.
And, given Alex's well-known biblical knowledge, it's a good instance of gaslighting, when someone manipulates another into doubting their own perception, memory, or sanity. Think of someone who shouts during an argument and then later insists that they were calm the whole time and that you were just being too sensitive. It's the same vehicle that Dinesh is driving. The man who can't explain a simplistic linguistic choice suddenly positions himself as the professor, lecturing Alex on supposed ignorance. It's also, mind you, an instance of a red herring fallacy, when someone introduces an irrelevant topic to distance themselves from the issue at hand. Imagine someone who's been confronted for shouting and, instead of addressing it, suddenly brings up how you forgot to do the dishes last week. Dinesh pulls the same stunt by pivoting to the progression from the Old to the New Testament to avoid explaining why genocide was commanded.
There is a movement within the Bible itself that you are completely missing.
Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished.
Clocking that Dinesh is about to spin the story that the New Testament plays by completely different moral rules, Alex heads him off by quoting Jesus' own words from the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5:17 through 20. It's a devastatingly effective move. By letting scripture do the talking, Alex forces Christian listeners to see that Dinesh's apologetics isn't just weak, but flatly contradicts the very figure he claims to follow. And the faster that this realization hits, the better, which is why Alex delivers it with ruthless efficiency.
Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven, but whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus said that in the Sermon on the Mount, referring to his fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy and law.
Rhetorically unforgiving, right? By citing Jesus' own words from the New Testament, Alex skewers Dinesh's claim that the Old Testament functions on a separate moral register. And by reading the relevant verses in its entirety, Alex removes himself as mere interpreter and instead allows Jesus himself to dictate the terms of the debate. To get more precise, the linguistic detail of the passage is critical. Jesus proclaims that he came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. Jesus does not license the abolition of the Old Testament. Quite the opposite. He reinforces continuity by insisting that not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. And so, placed against this backdrop, Dinesh's argument becomes utterly untenable. His effort to relegate Old Testament violence to a different moral framework is directly undercut by the very figure whose authority he claims to defend. Dinesh is in an impossible position here. Either reject the words of Christ or concede that the New Testament offers no escape from the moral problems of the Old Testament.
Jesus said that in the Sermon on the Mount, referring to his fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy and law.
Referring to his fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy.
Old Testament law.
Notice the carefully selective strategy at work as Dinesh tries to limit Jesus' statement to prophecy only, while completely ignoring the explicit reference to Old Testament law. Yeah, this is a particularly egregious example of the cherry-picking fallacy, when someone selects only the evidence that supports their position while ignoring contradictory evidence. Picture someone citing only sunny days to claim that it never rains. Dinesh demonstrates this by focusing solely on the prophecy, when Jesus explicitly said, law or the prophets.
Referring to his fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy.
Old
Look,
Testament law. And what I'm referring to here is an Old Testament law, which you're now trying to distance yourself
No,
from and say that it's sort of
I'm
different to the
saying-
New Testament.
I'm saying that you're
That's not what Jesus thought.
Consider the force of Alex's remark.
That's not what Jesus thought.
Up to this point, Dinesh has been attempting to distinguish between Old Testament law and the New Testament, suggesting that the harsher moral universe of the Old may be bypassed or relativized. Alex discards that distraction, emphasizing the words of Christ himself, Dinesh's uncontestable authority.
I'm saying you're missing the developmental track of the Bible that is obvious to any intelligent reader.
Notice how Dinesh slips from argument to insult, taking a jab at Alex's intelligence instead of answering the point. That's an indirect but unmistakable ad hominem fallacy, when someone attacks a person's intelligence rather than addressing their argument. It's the equivalent of saying any smart person knows that the earth is flat. The cheapness of the move is obvious. Unable to justify his theology, Dinesh is resorting to questioning Alex's intelligence, hoping to bluff his way through with condescension.
That is obvious to any intelligent reader.
And the irony is, the ambiguity cloaking Dinesh's language is nothing more than academic-sounding nonsense deployed as a smokescreen.
Let me give you one example of what I'm talking about.
Tell me about the Amalekites. Tell me what the development.
Alex presses the advantage by dragging him back to the core example that Dinesh wants to avoid, the Amalekites.
Tell me about the Amalekites.
It's a brilliant tactical move, because by refusing to let the debate drift into vague abstractions, Alex forces specificity. Explain to us, Dinesh, exactly how this applies to the Amalekites. And Alex knows what this means. It's a spotlight that there is no satisfying answer. Every return to the Amalekites tightens the trap. Either defend genocide or admit that you can't.
Tell me what the development.
It's not about the Amalekites. It's about the way that the
3 words, that's all it took to bring them right back to the moral reality. The bluntness is perfect. They are talking about divine genocide.
It's about the way that the whole story of the Bible changes in tone and mood and message.
Dinesh now attempts to reduce moral atrocity to the level of literary analysis. By speaking of tone and mood, he frames Old Testament genocide as though it were merely a stylistic feature of the text, akin to debating whether Hemingway's prose evolved across novels, rather than actually grappling with the moral weight of divinely commanded slaughter. Now, logically speaking, this is a category error, when someone applies criteria that make sense in one domain to an issue that belongs to an entirely different domain. It's like trying to measure someone's intelligence with kilograms. The categories simply don't match. That's what Dinesh is doing here. He treats moral atrocity as though it were a matter of literary tone and mood.
Changes in tone and mood and message.
We've moved from theology and ethics into literature class, where genocide is reimagined as a stylistic flourish of God's narrative arc, and the result is that mass killing is stripped away of its moral weight and trivialized into an aesthetic shift, as if divine slaughter were just another prose style.
Help me out here. Just tell me where, any way you like, tell me where this fits into that trajectory.
Okay, I'll tell you where.
We have just a couple minutes, guys, so let's wrap it up before the Q&A.
Just tell me where this fits in.
Even with time pressure bearing down, Alex refuses to let Dinesh's vague talk of tone or mood slide. He presses again, demanding a concrete explanation of how genocide fits into that supposed trajectory. This insistence forces Dinesh to move beyond abstraction and either confront the command directly or expose that his appeal to tone was nothing more than an evasion.
The underlying message of the Old Testament is an eye for an eye. The Amalekites are the enemies of the Israelites. The Israelites will crush them with the same venom that the Amalekites would have crushed the Israelites. That's called an eye for an eye.
At this point, you might have been expecting a deep dive into literary tone, perhaps a close reading of the Hebrew or an attempt to situate the passage in its historical context. But instead, Dinesh frames the slaughter of children and animals as a justified act of self-defense against a hypothetical Amalekite attack that never actually occurred.
The Israelites will crush them with the same venom that the Amalekites would have crushed the Israelites.
This isn't just evasion, it's an egregious case of hypothetical revenge, where real violence is exercised on the grounds of what someone might have done. By that logic, genocide becomes morally permissible, not because of what happened, but because of imagined possibilities. And the factual error makes this even worse. The biblical text explicitly states that God commanded the genocide as punishment for what the Amalekites did to the Israelites when they came up from Egypt, an event that occurred roughly 400 years earlier. The infants being slaughtered weren't even alive during the original offense, neither were their grandparents.
That's called an eye for an eye.
So this isn't eye for an eye, it's transgenerational collective punishment. It's your distant relative stole from mine, and now your bike is mine. By pretty much anyone's moral compass, it's immoral. It's why the international community condemns North Korea's barbaric system of inherited punishment. It's why executing someone's great-great-great-grandchild for a crime that they didn't commit is recognized as evil. In other words, Dinesh either doesn't know what his own holy book says, or he's banking on the audience not knowing it.
That's called an eye for an eye.
Including
now,
the children,
hold on.
The children, the infants,
The children,
the
the
cattle,
infants,
the sheep, the camels, the donkeys.
See how by listing the categories, children, infants, cattle, sheep, camels, donkeys, Alex thoroughly exposes the inadequacy of Dinesh's eye for an eye defense.
That's called an eye for an eye.
It's an enumeration that further highlights the absurdity of constructing genocide as proportional justice. Once again, by citing the text in detail, Alex compels Dinesh to confront its plain meaning. Either Dinesh must acknowledge that newborn babies and cattle were included within this supposed proportional response, or he must deny biblical text outright. Both options are disastrous for his position. Admission concedes the moral indefensibility, while denial undermines the authority of Scripture itself. To put it precisely, in rhetorical terms, this is a double bind, when someone traps another between two irreconcilable choices, making each response carry consequences. For example, if a politician compromises, they're attacked for being weak. If they refuse to compromise, they're attacked for being stubborn.
The camels, the donkeys.
Yeah, that Dennis Prager says yes.
Well, if Dennis Prager says yes,
That's true.
But my point is different. You will not find that spirit
not
at
enough for
all in the New Testament. In fact, in the New Testament, you've got a spirit of forgiveness.
once again, Dinesh makes someone else own the indefensible position while he pivots to safer ground.
You will not find that spirit
not
at
enough for
all in the New Testament.
Desperately attempting to quarantine Old Testament morality from New Testament doctrine, despite the same eternal, unchanging God at the heart of both.
You've got a spirit of forgiveness. So what I'm getting at is to pretend
probably
like
do
you
with some
don't
forgiveness
have
after
this.
that.
This is a sharp rhetorical reversal. By picking up Dinesh's own appeal to forgiveness, Alex turns it back on him.
Pretend
Probably
like
do
you
with some
don't
forgiveness
have
after
this.
that.
With just those few words, then, what Dinesh meant as a defense ends up working as an indictment, and the humor lands because the point is obvious. Yes, forgiveness would be needed after genocide.
I mean, seriously,
Christianity is named after Christ. It's based on Christ as a fulfillment of the Old Testament. But what does fulfillment mean? It actually means transcendence. In Abraham's time, blood sacrifices are normal.
So Dinesh is faced with the textual claim that Jesus came to fulfill the law. And what does he do? He tries to wiggle out of it by just changing what fulfill means. Now, it supposedly means transcendence.
Transcendence.
That is some crafty wordplay right there. When the plain text creates problems for your theology, just redefine the words mid-conversation. Here's the thing, though. We all know what fulfill means. It's to carry out, to bring into effect, to realize what was promised or required. Nothing about that suggests abolishing or moving beyond something. But notice how Dinesh tries to transform a statement of continuity into one of rapture. It's an interpretive leap with absolutely no lexical support. He's basically hoping that we, the audience, won't notice.
In Abraham's time, blood sacrifices are normal.
As for this observation, Dinesh just walked into moral relativism. You know, the idea that morality changes based on time and culture. It is a legitimate philosophical position, don't get me wrong. But here's the problem. Christians like Dinesh claim their God is the source of objective, unchanging morality, don't they? They argue that God's moral nature is eternal and perfect. So, which is it? Either God's morality is objective and genocide is always wrong, making these commands indefensible, or morality is relative to time and culture, meaning that God has no objective moral standard at all. Dinesh can't have it both ways. By saying that genocide was acceptable because blood sacrifices are normal in that era, he's essentially admitting that God's morality shifts with cultural norms. That destroys the entire foundation of Christian moral ethics.
Blood sacrifices are normal.
And notice the sleight of hand. Blood sacrifice isn't genocide. They're completely different categories of action. He's trying to conflate ritual animal sacrifice with wholesale slaughter of entire populations, including infants. Nice try, Dinesh, but No. But here's where it gets somehow even worse. He's factually way off. Yeah, animal sacrifice was common in the ancient Near East, sure, but the complete extermination of entire populations, including babies, that wasn't some universal practice that everyone was doing. Get this, the Code of Hammurabi, we're talking 1750 BCE here, way before the Israelite conquest narratives, actually contains laws protecting women and children. Ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian texts also show all sorts of varying practices regarding non-combatants in war. So Dinesh's whole everyone was doing it defense, it doesn't even hold up historically. He's not just making a bad moral argument, he is making it based on claims that aren't even true.
In Abraham's time, blood sacrifices are normal, right? When Christ comes as a sacrifice, Christ is the lamb. The point is, those blood sacrifices aren't necessary anymore.
Listen,
That's the Christian reading. And you keep filibustering me because you know that the Bible is showing a movement in a direction, and to miss the movement is to miss the Bible.
Okay, this is where things get genuinely surreal. Dinesh says, you keep filibustering me. But wait, what? He's accusing Alex of the exact thing that he's been doing this entire conversation. This is straight up projection, when someone accuses others of what they themselves are doing. It's like a thief calling everyone else suspicious, or a gossip warning others not to spread rumors. I mean, really? Dinesh has been refusing to answer the Amalekite question for the entire debate so far, and now he's accusing Alex of filibustering. And then, with admiring audacity, he tries to tell Alex what he supposedly knows, like he can just rewrite the conversation that we all just witnessed.
You know that the Bible is showing a movement in a direction, and to miss the movement is to miss the Bible. Let's look at God in the Bible.
Hold on.
Let me make one quick point about God in the Bible.
There's nothing quick about what you're doing, Dinesh. There's nothing quick about what you're doing. I need to be allowed to respond to what you're saying. I am getting sick whenever I have these
cross-examining me on.
And this is where Alex just calls it out. Right there, in the moment. He's directly exposing Dinesh's filibustering at the very moment Dinesh is accusing him of doing it.
Let me make one quick point about God in the Bible.
There's nothing quick about what you're doing, Dinesh. There's nothing quick about what you're doing.
That's not just frustration. That's drawing everyone's attention to the irony of the situation. It's showing the gap between what Dinesh claims and what he's actually doing. The turning point, however, comes with Alex's remark.
I am getting sick whenever
You're
I have
cross-examining me on.
Alex is pointing out a pattern here, a pattern that goes far beyond this one debate. These evasive strategies aren't just Dinesh being Dinesh, they're a recurring tendency among apologists when it comes to Old Testament genocide. Deflect, redefine, reframe, anything but actually address the moral problems head on. Put another way, what we're seeing isn't just an individual weakness, it is institutional avoidance. Taken as a whole, when we process the entire conversation so far, what becomes crystal clear is the impossibility of defending divinely commanded slaughter while trying to maintain moral authority. Every dodge, every deflection, every semantic maneuver, they all make the central question all the more glaring. How can you worship a god who commanded the killing of babies? The constant response, it seems, is not to answer, but to speak about anything else for as long as possible.
I am getting sick whenever I
You're
have these
cross-examining me on the justice of smiting the Amalekites. Honestly, I don't see any justice in it, but I do agree that that was the eye for an eye ethic of the Old Testament that is repudiated and transformed and transfigured in the New.
Right. So after playing dumb about the moral problems for who knows how long, Dinesh finally admits,
I don't see any justice in it.
He just says it. All those earlier evasions were what, exactly? Strategy? Not genuine confusion? In any case, this is rhetorical surrender disguised as theological sophistication. The man who's been dodging and weaving suddenly drops his guard and admits what we all knew he knew. There's no justification in genocide. But of course, he can't just leave it there. Notice how he immediately deploys mystical language, transformed and transfigured, using religious terminology to obscure how injustice sometimes becomes acceptable.
That was the eye for an eye ethic of the Old Testament that is repudiated and transformed and transfigured in the New.
I've had this conversation so many times, most recently with William Lane Craig. At least he had the gall to just tell me that yes, that was a moral thing for God to do. I get sick to death of people hand-waving away this genocide by some vague reference to the fact that Jesus came along to do something which somehow kind of undoes the immorality of it. Like, this is not an eye for an eye. This is a genocide of combatant men, innocent women, and children, and animals. Saul is punished by God for not killing all of the animals.
Oh, this is good. Alex deploys comparative shaming, noting that even William Lane Craig had the gall to defend it directly rather than evade.
If God wills to end the life of the Canaanite children prematurely, that's his prerogative.
By bringing up one of, if not the, most prominent defenders of Christianity in the past few decades, Alex is highlighting Dinesh's intellectual cowardice by pointing out that other apologists at least have the courage to state their horrifying position outright.
Why was it right for God to slaughter women and children in the Old Testament? How can that ever be right?
It's right for God to slaughter women and children anytime he pleases.
To put a finer point on it, it's a subtle divide and conquer move, when someone creates divisions between opponents to prevent them from uniting against a common foe. Alex is essentially saying, your own team can't even agree on how to handle this. Some apologists bite the bullet and defend genocide, while others dance around it endlessly. By highlighting this split, Alex shows the position is so untenable that Christian apologists can't even settle on a unified defense. When your position is so weak that other apologists look brave by comparison for simply saying what they believe, you know that you're in trouble. Lastly, notice how Alex refuses to let euphemism or abstraction obscure the moral reality.
This is not an eye for an eye. This is a genocide of combatant men, innocent women, and children, and animals. Saul is punished by God for not killing all of the animals.
Innocent women and children, and animals. No hiding behind theological jargon here. Just the plain, horrifying fact that Saul is punished by God for not completing a genocide thoroughly enough. Let that sink in. Punished for showing mercy to animals during a genocide.
Saul is punished by God for not killing all of the animals. Like
that is actually a ludicrous misreading of what's happening.
Let me just make
Saul
a.
and David.
He's confident. We've got to give him that. This is a beautiful example of gaslighting, when someone makes you question your accurate perception of reality. Imagine if someone saw you take their wallet and then you insisted that, no you didn't, they're just imagining things. Dinesh is trying this by calling Alex's direct biblical quotation a ludicrous misreading.
That is actually a ludicrous misreading of what's happening.
The sheer audacity here becomes clear when you actually check the text. So let's do that, shall we? 1 Samuel 15:9-11 explicitly states, "But Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and cattle. The word of the Lord came to Samuel. I regret that I have made Saul king, because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions." And then, get this, 1 Samuel 15:33 shows Samuel himself killing Agag to complete the commanded genocide. So Dinesh is literally calling an accurate biblical quotation a ludicrous misreading. The gaslighting is so obvious that it's almost insulting. Does he think that we can't, read?
That is actually a ludicrous misreading of what's happening.
Let me just make a quick point. I have to make this point.
Okay.
I've got to read the text from Joshua as well. In the slaughter of Ai, that's a type of Canaanite. In Joshua, we're told that when Israel had finished killing all of the men in Ai, in the fields and in the wilderness, where they had chased them, and when every one of them had been put to the sword, the Israelites returned to Ai and killed those who were in it. That is to say, that we're told that this is just because the promised land was inhabited, and God's God, he's allowed to do this. So because the Israelites want that land, they have to go and chase out the Ai. So they chase them into the wilderness. They chase after them. They slaughter them in the wilderness. They then turn around, come back into the city, and kill who's left. Who's left if the combatants have run away? The women and the children. This is intolerable.
Once again, on the topic of is the Bible true, Alex is the one bringing biblical receipts while Dinesh claims that they're being misread. The evidence is overwhelming. Joshua 8:24-25 states, "When Israel had finished killing all the men of Ai in the fields and in the wilderness where they had chased them, and when all of them to the very last had fallen by the sword, all the Israelites returned to Ai and killed those who were in it. 12,000 men and women fell that day, all the people of Ai." The logical progression Alex walks us through is devastating in its simplicity.
They then turn around, come back into the city, and kill who's left. Who's left if the combatants have run away? The women and the children.
There is no ambiguity here. The text explicitly describes chasing down and killing the fighters, then returning to slaughter whoever remained in the city. The moral verdict is clear and uncompromising. This is intolerable.
This is intolerable, and I cannot have it
Well, hold on,
simply,
hold on. I
simply waved away. With
All right,
reference to the
hang
character
on.
of Jesus.
Let me just for a second.
It can't happen. It can't keep happening.
Perfect frame control. The escape route Dinesh has been trying to construct throughout this entire exchange is explicitly blocked. There will be no Jesus hand-waving, no appeals to the New Testament to somehow make genocide acceptable.
It can't keep happening.
Let's pause
You're completely blind to the irony of what you're saying.
That's quite the gaslighting. Dinesh insists that Alex is completely blind, desperately trying to position him as missing something obvious, scrambling to regain the rhetorical high ground he's been hemorrhaging for the past few minutes. The irony of Dinesh's claim that Alex is the blind one is, of course, that the only blindness on display is his own refusal to confront the moral catastrophe that is right before us all.
Christianity invented the just war tradition, according to which the slaughter of women and children is out of bounds. Prior to Christianity, no one thought this. Everybody did it, and everybody today does it everywhere in the world, and we do it too. The bombing of Dresden, the bombing of Hamburg, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The incineration of women and children is the normal course of war.
Heating things up, Dinesh tries to normalize genocide through historical relativism, essentially arguing that mass murder is fine, or was fine, because it was popular.
Everybody did it.
He claims that Christianity invented the rule against killing innocents, while, in the same breath, defending his God for commanding exactly that.
Christianity invented the just war tradition.
It is wild. He's praising Christianity for making the rule, while admitting that its deity broke it. The false universalism here, everyone did it, and everyone today does it, is both morally bankrupt and factually incorrect. But first, here's the problem with the logic. It's the bandwagon fallacy, arguing something is acceptable just because everyone does it.
Everybody today does it everywhere in the world.
Except, here's the devastating part. He's abandoned moral absolutism entirely. The defender of objective Christian morality just argued that genocide is fine when it's trendy. Now, as for his historical claim, allow me to retort.
The slaughter of women and children is out of bounds. Prior to Christianity, no one thought this.
Dinesh's claim that prior to Christianity no one thought this is simply false. We've already referenced the Code of Hammurabi from 1750 BCE as evidence that even historically war operated with defined parameters. But on top of that, consider Buddhist texts from the 5th century BCE explicitly condemning killing of innocents, or the Hindu laws of Manu, which state, "Let him not strike one who is unarmed." Another example that comes to mind is ancient Chinese military philosophy, including Sun Tzu's Art of War from 500 BCE, which advocated treating captives well. Even the Roman law of war predates Christianity, and it included restrictions on the treatment of non-combatants. So much, then, for Christianity's unique moral innovation. As for Dinesh's claim that everyone today does it everywhere in the world, the Geneva Convention, signed by 196 countries, explicitly forbids targeting civilians. The Rome Statute of International Criminal Court, ratified by 123 states, defines the international targeting of civilians as a war crime. Sure, violations happen, but here's the thing. The deliberate targeting of civilians isn't accepted practice. It's treated as a crime, even if prosecutions don't always follow through. So, in effect, Dinesh has just equated his god, his supposedly good god, with modern war criminals who happen to get away with it.
The incineration of women and children is the normal course of war. I just watched a World War II documentary in which they interview an old bomber, a US bomber pilot, and he goes, "I was given a bombing mission to hit a target. I asked the US authorities, who's in the building? They said 20,000 women and children." And this guy kind of breaks down. You can watch this on Netflix. And he goes, I'm like, what the hell? You want me to kill 20,000 women and children? He goes, we're supposed to be the good guys. And he goes, but I couldn't repudiate the order. It was an order, so I did it. So what I'm getting at is,
he's launching into a lengthy World War II story to avoid the biblical genocide sitting right in front of him. It's yet another red herring fallacy, introducing irrelevant information to distract. But it gets worse. There's a moral equivalence here that he's drawing that is genuinely staggering. He's equating human war crimes with divine commands, inadvertently putting God on the same moral level as mortal criminals. This is the false equivalence fallacy, treating unlike things as equal. Imagine comparing a parent grounding a child with imprisonment. That gets you the general idea of the fallacy. To compare the moral failure of a fallible pilot with the deliberate order of an omnipotent deity collapses the difference between human weakness and divine perfection. And the irony is brutal. Dinesh isn't elevating God to transcendence, he's dragging him down to criminality. If the analogy holds, then God is not morally transcendent, but utterly compromised. Which leaves us with a devastating question. In this theology, who are we really supposed to call the good guys?
He goes, we're supposed to be the good guys. And he goes, but I couldn't repudiate the order. It was an order, so I did it. So what I'm getting at is
that everybody does it.
This is the kill shot, stripping away the storytelling and exposing Dinesh's actual argument. A simple bandwagon fallacy. The genocide is okay because it was common. So in just 6 words, Alex turned Dinesh's long monologue into what it really is. Moral bankruptcy, dressed up as historical analysis.
Is that everybody does it.
It is not ethical, it is not, but I'm simply saying, Alex, that you are a product of the Christian morality that repudiates it now. You're standing on a Christian mountain and acting like, whoa, look at these Christians. They taught you to talk like this.
We just can't catch a break, can we? Every time Dinesh tries to climb out of the hole, he just digs a little deeper. Here, he's committing a textbook case of circular reasoning when someone concludes something assumed in the premise. You've heard this kind of loop before. It's like saying that the Bible is true because God wrote it, and we know that God wrote it because the Bible says so. Dinesh is doing the same thing here by claiming that Alex's moral intuition originates from Christianity. Therefore, he cannot criticize Christianity.
You are a product of the Christian morality.
Christianity is moral because it taught morality, which we know because Christianity says that it invented morality. It's a philosophical Ouroboros. And that patronizing, they taught you to talk like this, is the rhetorical equivalent of patting someone on the head.
You're standing on a Christian mountain and acting like, whoa, look at these Christians. They taught you to talk like this.
Here, Dinesh slips into tu quoque, dismissing criticism by saying that the critic is guilty of the same thing. It's like a smoker saying, you can't tell me that cigarettes are unhealthy because you smoke too. Whether the critic smokes or not has zero bearing on whether cigarettes cause cancer, right? Dinesh demonstrates this with his choice words. You're standing on a Christian mountain.
You're standing on a Christian mountain and acting like, whoa, look at these Christians.
The accusation of inconsistency might sting rhetorically. In fact, it does. It's a powerful move. But it's logically irrelevant. The point, indeed, is not to engage Alex's reasoning, but to suggest that because he speaks in a language that's been shaped by Christianity, he has no standing to criticize it. Beyond this, Dinesh faces crushing factual problems. I know, shock. Confucius taught reciprocal ethics in 551 BCE. Buddha made non-violence the first precept in 563 BCE. Greek Stoics like Marcus Aurelius developed natural law theory independent of Christianity. The so-called Christian morality mountain ignores entire libraries of moral philosophy from multiple traditions. And even after Christianity took to the stage, the record is hardly consistent. History is full of Christian atrocities against civilians that contradict Dinesh's narrative. He's not standing on a mountain, he's sinking in quicksand, grabbing at any branch of bad argument to avoid drowning in the implications of divine genocide.
They taught you to talk like this.
Dinesh, these people did not teach me to think like that.
They did.
We've reached the point where Dinesh has exhausted his rhetorical arsenal so thoroughly that he has nothing left in the tank. They did. That's it. No argument, no elaboration, just the conversational equivalent of a child plugging their ears and shouting, "Nuh-uh!"
They did.
It's genuinely fascinating to watch someone slide from polished apologetics down to playground-level discourse, right? What makes this particularly revealing is the feigned ignorance underlining Dinesh's insistence. He's pretending not to know about the vast landscape of secular moral philosophy, Eastern religions that predate Christianity by millennia, or the pre-Christian ethical systems that condemned killing innocents long before Jesus entered the historical record. I mean, what else are we supposed to believe? that a man of Dinesh's educational caliber has never heard of Enlightenment philosophers and their contributions, the likes of Kant deriving a categorical imperative from pure reason, or Bentham and Mill grounding ethics in the greatest good for the greatest number, or Rousseau and Locke's social contract theories, or the evolutionary ethics that shows reciprocal altruism in species that have never attended Sunday school, or the cross-cultural moral intuitions documented by anthropologists in societies with zero Christian contact. The sheer scope of what Dinesh must pretend not to know to maintain his position is staggering. He's effectively insisting that humans had no concept that murdering children was wrong until Christianity came along, a claim so historically illiterate it makes flat earth theory look rigorous.
These people did not teach me to think like that.
They did.
These people were listening to their God who was telling them to slaughter innocent women
That's
and
right.
children.
Alex demonstrates masterful control here. Dinesh needs the conversation to stay firmly within the parameters of Christianity's influence on Alex's moral development, but Alex drags it back to the original topic with the conversational equivalent of a leash correction. It's a subtle but crucial move, keeping Dinesh firmly in the defensive position. This is what it looks like when someone who actually understands rhetoric faces someone who merely performs it.
These people were listening to their God who was telling them to slaughter innocent women
That's
and
right.
children.
The ancient Israelites were, but the ancient Israelites are not what taught you. What taught you is the 1,000-year tradition of the early Christian church.
Did you catch that? He blurts, "That's right." Indeed, after fighting tooth and nail the entire debate, Dinesh casually hands Alex the win, openly admitting that his God commanded slaughter. The man who spent the last hour building elaborate theological escape hatches just walked through the front door and admitted the whole thing.
These people were listening to their God who was telling them to slaughter innocent women
That's
and
right.
children.
The ancient Israelites.
What's the strategy here? Say it quickly enough, move on fast enough, and maybe no one will notice that he just conceded the entire argument.
What taught you is the 1,000-year tradition of the early Christian church,
which came a bit too late for the Amalekites.
Alex deploys dark irony, one of my favourite indulgences, highlighting the grotesque absurdity of claiming that later Christian ethics somehow retroactively justifies earlier divine genocide. It's the theological equivalent of saying, sure, we murdered your family, but look how nice we are to other people now.
Which came a bit too late for the Amalekites.
This sardonic observation completely demolishes Dinesh's developmental argument. Those Amalekite children didn't get to benefit from God's post-Old Testament development arc. They got slaughtered on version 1.0, and Dinesh is essentially arguing that it's fine because version 2.0 has better features.
Which came a bit too late for the Amalekites.
It came a bit too late for the Amalekites, to be sure.
The flippant "to be sure" reveals a level of moral callousness that's genuinely disturbing. We're talking about the systemic extermination of an entire people, infants, children, pregnant women, and Dinesh tosses off "to be sure" like he's acknowledging a minor scheduling conflict. Oh yes, the genocide victims. A bit bad timing there, to be sure.
Came a bit too late for the Amalekites, to be sure.
This is actually a massive concession. After all his deflections and gymnastics, he's effectively thrown in the towel. If Alex wanted maximal rhetorical impact, he'd spotlight this moment, drawing the audience's attention to the fact that even Dinesh, after all of this maneuvering, has conceded that God's commands to the Israelites were morally indefensible.
It came a bit too late for the Amalekites, to be sure.
Were the Israelite armies not instructed by the God that you believe in?
By stripping away the theological and rhetorical insulation, Alex corners him in the same dilemma once again. Its very simplicity makes it brutally clear to all watching, leaving no room for evasion. There is nowhere left to run.
Were the Israelite armies not instructed by the God that you believe in?
They were instructed by God.
After all that extensive evasion, all those rhetorical smokescreens, all the theological tap dancing, we finally get the direct admission. They were instructed by God. So there's no qualifiers here, no hedging, not even a, well, actually, just the flat acknowledgement that God ordered mass killing.
They were instructed by God.
And they were instructed to do things which you would now consider to be immoral, yes?
Alex keeps tightening the screws, stripping away every possible escape route. Each question removes another layer of ambiguity, another possible escape route. He's setting up the final kill, forcing Dinesh to explicitly admit that God commanded immorality, the ultimate theological contradiction that undermines the entire foundation of divine command theory.
And they were instructed to do things which you would now consider to be immoral, yes?
Absolutely.
And there it is. This single word represents Dinesh's theological surrender. God commanded acts that are immoral. The entire edifice of divine command theory, the idea that morality flows from God's nature and commands, crumbles with this admission. If God can command immoral acts, then either God is not perfectly good or morality exists independent of God. If morality is independent of God, then humans have access to moral truth apart from revelation, and scripture is not the foundation of ethics, but one source among thousands. If God is not perfectly good, worshipping itself is deeply compromised, because it means giving allegiance to the Yahweh Dinesh is scrambling to recharacterize. Either outcome is devastating for his apologetic project. Either outcome decimates Dinesh's philosophical position.
Absolutely.
So God has commanded them to do something which you now consider to be immoral, whether or not you consider it to be immoral because of the later developments of Christian ethics. God himself has told us that we must abandon our intuition that the slaughter of women and children, and by the way, when it's unnecessary in those instances to slaughter them, is wrong.
Alex takes his victory lap here, spelling out the full implications of Dinesh's concessions for anyone in the audience who might have missed them. God commanded people to override their moral intuitions and commit atrocities. God told them to ignore that inner voice saying, "Don't murder children." God instructed them to suppress the consciousness that recoils at the slaughter of innocents, all to align with his will.
God himself has told us that we must abandon our intuition.
And these weren't even necessary killings. Alex emphasizes their gratuitous nature.
And by the way, when it's unnecessary in those instances to slaughter them.
The unavoidable takeaway is that morality doesn't originate with divine authority. At best, God's commands sometimes align with moral truth, and in cases like this, they violate it outright. If human consciousness can stand in judgment against divine command, then morality must have some source deeper or more reliable than scripture.
God himself has told us that we must abandon our intuition that the slaughter of women and children, and by the way, when it's unnecessary in those instances to slaughter them, is wrong.
I don't view it that way. This is how I view it. Let's put it this way. Even in the ancient world, divine revelation comes into a primitive, barbaric world which is full of a lot of really bad guys.
But even after his complete admission of defeat, Dinesh reaches for one more desperate frame shift, the primitive world defense, as if the omnipotent creator of the universe was somehow constrained by human barbarism, as if God looked down and said, I'd really like to teach them not to commit genocide, but they're just too primitive to understand. So I'll command it instead. This is a damning example of a special pleading fallacy, when someone demands an exception for their position without justification. If we presented a moral framework that permitted genocide, Dinesh would immediately dismiss it as proof that our framework wasn't objective. Yet when his own framework commands genocide, suddenly it's excusable because the people were primitive.
Even in the ancient world, divine revelation comes into a primitive, barbaric world which is full of a lot of really bad guys.
The same God who supposedly parted the seas, resurrected the dead, and created the universe from nothing is apparently powerless against Bronze Age norms. And beyond being logically bankrupt, it's factually wrong. The ancient Near East wasn't uniformly primitive or barbaric. Egyptian medical papyri show sophisticated scientific knowledge. The library of Ashurbanipal in the 7th century BCE housed thousands of texts on law, medicine, and literature. These societies developed moral and legal codes that explicitly protected the weak and vulnerable. But according to Dinesh, the all-powerful God couldn't work with any of that and had to resort to commanding war crimes instead. So this part of the exchange ends with Dinesh retreating into a fantasy version of history where God's hands were tied behind human limitations, totally undermining the very concept of divine omnipotence. After being forced to admit that God commanded immoral acts, his final defense boils down to God couldn't help it. And that might be the most laughable concession yet.
Even in the ancient world, divine revelation comes into a primitive, barbaric world which is full of a lot of really bad guys.
And God says, keep going.
This is Alex twisting the knife. By voicing the implication of Dinesh's logic, it exposes the absurdity. God isn't opposing barbarism, he's cheering it on. It's a devastating way to show that the conclusion isn't Alex's invention, it's where Dinesh's own argument naturally leads.
And God says, keep going.
No,
Keep it up. You're doing such a good job.
And then Alex doubles down with mockery, painting God as a cosmic cheerleader for cruelty. By exaggerating it just slightly, Alex makes the horror of the logic plain for everyone in the room.
Keep it up. You're doing such a good job.
God does not say keep going, but what God does is and again, this is called, trying to get the point of what is happening. There's slavery in this world, in the ancient world, and it is true. The Bible doesn't come in and go, we denounce slavery, we denounce the killing of women and children.
Well, Dinesh just admitted that the Bible doesn't denounce slavery or the killing of innocents, which is a breath of fresh air. Apologists often pretend otherwise.
Galatians 3:28, in Christ there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free. Very clearly, the first century Church of Jesus Christ was committed to slavery as unacceptable.
It's true, the perfect moral guidebook, supposedly authored by an all-powerful and all-loving God, it doesn't tell us that slavery is wrong, but it does find time to legislate about not wearing wool and linen. So fabric segregation over human dignity makes sense.
It is true. The Bible doesn't come in and go, we denounce slavery, we denounce the killing of women and children.
This strategic concession tells us something profound. Dinesh knows that he can't defend the indefensible, so he tries to normalize it. His excuse is context. That was just the ancient world. But that line of reasoning collapses immediately because an omnipotent being couldn't be constrained by context at all. Again, if we created an ethical system that allowed genocide or slavery, Dinesh would instantly dismiss it as proof our morality wasn't objective. Yet when his framework commands those very things, he invents a special exception. Suddenly it's fine because people were too primitive. It's like claiming that a judge has no choice but to accept bribes because corruption was too widespread to resist. And once again, the factual reality makes this even worse. The Bible doesn't merely fail to denounce slavery, it actively regulates it. Exodus 21 lays out detailed rules for buying and selling slaves. Leviticus 25:44 through 46 explicitly permits purchasing foreign slaves as permanent property, to be passed down to your children. The New Testament continues this horrific tradition with passages like Ephesians 6:5, commanding slaves obey your earthly masters, and 1 Peter 2:18, instructing slaves to submit even to harsh masters. St. Aquinas knew this. St. Augustine knew this. This wasn't controversial until suspiciously during and especially after the Enlightenment.
The Bible doesn't come in and go, we denounce slavery, we denounce the killing of women and children. It doesn't do that.
The opposite.
The precision of this correction is razor sharp, and it is critical. Alex refuses to let Dinesh reframe the conversation as why doesn't the Bible denounce genocide? The point isn't silence, it's the opposite. The Bible actively commands these acts. Alex makes sure that the audience can't miss it.
We denounce the killing of women and children. It doesn't do that.
The opposite.
It actually immerses itself into an existing, admittedly barbaric culture. And what's actually going on there with the Amalekites, the Canaanites, and so on, if you just read the Old Testament, it tells you. It has to do with the displacement of polytheism with monotheism.
Wait, did Dinesh just argue that genocide is legitimate if it advances monotheism?
It has to do with the displacement of polytheism with monotheism.
That's the logic that's been used to justify monotheistic wars for centuries, for thousands of years. The Crusades, the Inquisitions, the forced conversions of entire people. The claim is that extermination can be righteous if it clears the way for the true faith.
It has to do with the displacement of polytheism with monotheism.
But here's something even more bizarre. Dinesh asserts that God doesn't resist barbaric culture, but is instead shaped by it. The all-powerful deity is apparently taking cues from his people rather than the other way around.
It actually immerses itself into an existing, admittedly barbaric culture.
This flips the entire idea of divine moral authority on its head, making God a mere mirror of cultural practice, a morally contingent product of time and place. And in doing so, it undermines the whole doctrine of revelation. In this framing, scripture isn't divine instruction breaking into human history, it's profoundly human violence projected onto the divine. Lurking underneath is classic ends justify the means reasoning, the idea that good outcomes can excuse evil methods. Ironically, consequentialism, well, a variation of it. It's like saying that stealing food is fine if it helps you stick to your diet plan. Dinesh applies this by suggesting that genocide was an acceptable way to establish monotheism, but monotheism certainly doesn't require genocide to proliferate. Zoroastrianism spread throughout Persia without commanding extermination, and non-theistic religions and traditions like Buddhism and Jainism expanded across Asia without divinely mandating violence on a scale. The notion that monotheism needed babies slaughtered in order to survive says more about the specific theology than it does about religious conversion in general.
It has to do with the displacement of polytheism with monotheism.
Oh, that's fine.
Hold on.
That justifies the murder of children and women.
This is Alex demanding moral clarity. He's not letting Dinesh hide behind mere assertions. He's pressing him to spell out the justification, knowing full well that Dinesh can't do this without revealing the horror of his own position.
That justifies the murder of children and women.
I didn't say it does.
That's what you're implying.
I'm saying that the way it happens is...
The conversational forensics are sharp. Alex catches the implication immediately. Why else bring up monotheism versus polytheism unless it's meant to justify the violence? Dinesh floated theological displacement as a defense. Alex calls it out for what it is.
That's what you're implying.
I'm saying that the way it happens historically is God takes a side. The single monotheistic God, who by the way in the Old Testament does not act like a monotheistic God, he acts like a tribal God. Right? He acts like the God.
This moment of seemingly accidental honesty detonates Dinesh's entire theology. He admits the supposedly universal God of all creation acted like a local tribal deity, picking favourites in border disputes, just like Poseidon, Athena, or any other war god. This shreds the entire notion of Christianity, and Alex's immediate enthusiasm shows that he knows that he's finally got clarity. Dinesh has, finally, admitted the point that he's been pressing all this time for.
Who, by the way, in the Old Testament does not act like a monotheistic God, he acts like a tribal God. Right? He acts like the God of only the Israelites.
And so Israel's enemies... Listen to what you just said. The God that you believe in is acting like a tribal war god.
Alex forces Dinesh and the audience to digest what's just been said. This is clarity, this is honesty, and it's unconscionable. What Dinesh is now admitting resembles exactly what the likes of William Lane Craig acknowledges, that the Old Testament God behaves like a tribal deity, which makes Alex's earlier pressure all the more devastating.
Listen to what you just said. The God that you believe in is acting like a tribal war god.
The God of the... Yes, the God that is depicted in the Old Testament is... He goes, I'm picking the Jews. Yes. I'm choosing you.
At this point, Dinesh has explicitly conceded that his supposedly universal, perfectly moral God acted like a partisan tribal war deity, choosing ethnic favourites. This isn't a minor concession, it's the complete collapse of his universal moral framework. And it's worth noting, ironically, that his concession aligns with the scholarly consensus. Early Israelite religion was henotheistic, worshipping one God while acknowledging others existed, before evolving into strict monotheism. The Old Testament itself reflects this, Yahweh competing with Baal, presiding over a divine council, behaving as a local war god before later being rebranded as universal. Dinesh has essentially admitted that his god evolved out of tribalism, which raises the devastating question, if God can change from tribal deity to universal being, then which version represents the true divine morality?
I get sick to death of people hand-waving away this genocide.
Dennis Prager says yes.
Alright, so that was quite the sight, right? What we just witnessed wasn't just rhetorical self-destruction, it was also a masterclass in how to keep relentless pressure on an opponent. Dinesh reached for every trick in the apologetic arsenal. Deflection, we won't talk about the Amalekites.
Well, let's not talk about the Amalekites.
Appeal to false authority.
If you want to go to, Dennis Prager, who has written about this from a Jewish perspective.
Gaslighting.
And you keep filibustering me. That is actually a ludicrous misreading of what's happening.
Even historical relativism, arguing that war crimes are acceptable if they're popular, while condemning relativism everywhere else.
Everybody did it. And everybody today does it everywhere in the world, and we do it too.
None of it worked, because Alex O'Connor kept pulling the discussion back to the central question. Did your God command the slaughter of infants?
Were the Israelite armies not instructed by the God that you believe in?
They were instructed by God.
And they were instructed to do things which you would now consider to be immoral, yes?
Absolutely.
Every rhetorical escape was just that, an escape attempt. Topic shifts, evasions, sudden switching to Yahweh when things got uncomfortable. All of it pointed to the same truth. He knew the position was indefensible, and that final shrug,
which came a bit too late for the Amalekites.
It came a bit too late for the Amalekites, to be sure.
was chilling. Genocide framed as an unfortunate but temporary stage of God's development, like a bug patch in the Jesus update. What this exchange shows is the futility of defending the indefensible. Every apologist facing this charge that God commanded atrocities runs the same cycle: redefine, deflect, and, if you're lucky, finally concede.
I've had this conversation so many times, most recently with William Lane Craig. At least he had the gall to just tell me that yes, that was a moral thing for God to do. I get sick to death of people hand-waving away this genocide by some vague reference to the fact that Jesus came along to do something which somehow kind of undoes the immorality of it.
Reconciling divine authority with divine atrocity isn't just hard, it's impossible. And make no mistake, Alex deserves credit for keeping the focus sharp. Time and time again, he pulled the debate back from the weeds to the one question that matters. That is no small feat. It's what kept Dinesh from burying the discussion in noise. The Amalekites couldn't wait for God's character development. Neither should we. Thank you kindly for the view, and to everyone who supports the channel, including our sponsor, Ground News. You can check them out by clicking the link below or scanning the QR code on screen now for 40% off their Vantage plan. They are an awesome application. I have used them every day for years at this point, and honestly, I'm not sure the channel would be where it is without them. So please do check them out. Thanks.